we're good. I mean,
Okay.
In my ideal world, you would say, I hope that you fry this at home.
Oh, fry this at home. Don't forget to fry this at home. Yeah, right. Just put it on just write it on the screen or something. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. I'm here in the NYT Cooking studio for another episode of Try This at Home. And today's recipe is a particularly fun one, and there's no oven required. Cannoli, that classic Sicilian pastry. This recipe is just so much fun and so delicious. The best cannoli you can get is when you're gonna make it home. Let's talk about what makes a cannoli a good cannoli. Definitely it is a tender, very crisp all the way through shell. So it should have this kind of shattering, tender consistency. And then you want this thick, rich but not too rich ricotta filling. It's really not overly complicated. The dough is super straightforward. The major challenge for people making cannoli at home is two things. One is deep frying, so we're definitely going to talk about that process, how to make it less scary. And two is finding the molds. So not that they're hard to find, but you have to order them. So that's a necessary thing. But beyond that, the rest of the recipe is really straightforward. It requires no special equipment other than the molds. So there's two components for making cannoli. One is the dough and one is the filling. I'm gonna start by making the dough. The most important thing, I think, when you're making a cannoli shell is achieving those big, blistery air pockets in the shell. That's what's gonna make it eat super light and crisp. And you don't want something that's hard and that you have to kind of crunch down with your teeth that's cookie-like. You want something light and airy and bubbly. So the key to that is the moisture content of the dough. There were things that I read that said, oh, the bubbles are the result of the alcohol in the wine because there's wine in the recipe, or that it's about working in air as you're kneading it. It's I didn't really find any of that to be true. It's just about putting a kind of certain amount of moisture in the dough so that when it goes into the fryer, the moisture turns to steam and you get these little bubbles. So all-purpose flour. Just gonna go into my bowl. I'm gonna add a little bit of sugar. The sugar doesn't really make the dough sweet, but it does help give it a nice browning effect. Kosher salt. The only spice that I'm adding is cinnamon, which I think is a great complement to the ricotta filling. Cannoli dough needs to do two things. It needs to be tender, so that when you fry it, you get that really crisp texture. But it also needs to have a certain amount of stretchability or extensibility, that ability to kind of roll out into a really, really thin layer. You get the extensibility by working it, developing a little bit of gluten, making some structure in the dough, and then the tenderness comes from the presence of fat in the dough. So the fat of choice for cannoli is lard. So I have 1 ounce of lard here. You can find it in the pork section of a lot of big grocery stores. You could use refined coconut oil, but lard is gonna give you really good flavor and really good tenderness. This is chilled, by the way. It's just easier to work with when it's cold. So now you wanna do this step called cutting in the fat. This is called a pastry cutter. I don't have this at home, so I was using 2 butter knives. So what you wanna do is basically work this into small pieces. And if you don't have a pastry cutter, you can basically use 2 knives where you do this kind of slicing motion, where you cut it in like this, kind of dragging the 2 knives across each other. Or if you have a pastry blender, it just goes a lot faster. That's this tool, and you just work it in like this. You want to work it in until the fat is about the size of a lentil. And what happens is the fat starts to coat the flour, and it gets in the way of these gluten strands forming, so it does help you to maintain a tender dough, even though you're going to be rolling it out really thin. So now I'm going to beat 1 egg. And because I'm making such a small quantity, I don't need to add the whole thing. So I'm going to add some of it to the dough, and I'm gonna reserve the rest for forming the shells, because it's the egg that's gonna glue the dough together so that I can form this tube shape. I'm just gonna beat it with a fork. Okay, so now I'm gonna make a little bit of a well, work the flour up the sides, leaving a little bit of a depression in the center. And I'm gonna add 1 tablespoon of my egg. And I'm gonna add a 1/4 cup of white wine. So I'm using white wine. You'll see recipes that call for red wine. Marsala is common. I like white wine because it doesn't alter the color of the dough. I'm using a dry white wine, so something that's not gonna add a lot of sweetness. I like to just use a fork in the beginning, because if I were to stick my hands in there, they're gonna get coated in liquid, and then everything's gonna stick to them. So now I'm gonna work this mixture inside the bowl to try to bring it together into a dough. It smells really good. Harris and I like have a hard time finishing a bottle of wine ourselves, and like sometimes we don't have any wine open. So we keep a box of wine that comes in that like foil bag where there's no oxygen and like the little spigot. And so it's just really useful. So it's like a quarter cup of wine. I don't want to open a bottle. So I'm going to turn everything out onto my work surface. I still have a couple little dry bits. So I just want to work it and incorporate any of these dry bits. And it might seem a little dry in the beginning, but as soon as you start to work it, it'll really soften up quite a bit. Even doubling it, it's still a very manageable amount of dough. I don't need to work it to like full gluten development. I don't actually want to do that. I just want to work it so that it's homogeneous and like a little bit elastic. So it just takes a couple minutes. If the dough is a little bit sticky, I'm just going to add a little bit of extra flour. Those little bits of lard, those are getting worked into the dough, and it almost acts, it's like a greasing agent, like it makes it so that the dough doesn't stick. It's not perfectly smooth, it's like a little bit mottled, but you don't need to work it beyond that. Now what we want to do is let it rest, because we've just worked the dough. If we were to roll this out directly, it's going to spring back. If you're gonna make these like same day, you could leave it out if you wanted to, but if you're gonna rest it for more than a couple hours, definitely you want to keep it in the fridge. So into the fridge, yep. I decided to go a pretty like traditional and also simple route for the filling, where it's basically just ricotta. Traditionally in Sicily, it's sheep's milk ricotta, which is like a little bit funkier, has sort of a more complex flavor. If you can find it, that's amazing. You should definitely use it. What will probably be easier to find for you is just a very high quality cow milk ricotta, so full fat also, whole milk ricotta. So you need 16 ounces, and what we want to do is drain it, try to get rid of some of that water, because what happens is if you leave that water in there, it thins out the filling, and then when you add the sugar, it gets really loose. Stirring it is going to help it to release some of that water, and I'm going to scrape it into a mesh sieve set over a bowl. So we want it to release all that water. I'm going to cover it with some plastic and put it in the fridge, and then after about 24 hours, we'll check it. I have one that was set up last night. And depending on the brand, it will have released anywhere from like 1 to several tablespoons of liquid. See, it's already starting to drain a bit. So I'll cover this. This will go into the fridge. This is that same ricotta, but this was left overnight in the fridge here to drain. So you can see that the ricotta has released, this is like several tablespoons. I would guess this is 2 to 3 tablespoons of water. So that's significant. We don't want that in the filling. So I'm going to get rid of that. I went back and forth a lot in kind of how I wanted to assemble the filling. Like, did I want to use a food processor? Did I not want to use a food processor? Did I want to whip it? Did I want to put it in a stand mixer? And I just decided that the version I liked best was just the one where all they did was press it through the sieve into the bowl and then stirred through the flavoring. And I'm just taking a flexible spatula and kind of scraping the ricotta across the bottom of the sieve. And this is going to help to smooth it out. Depending on the quality of your ricotta, if you just stirred it really vigorously, you could achieve a similar texture, but it's sort of uncertain, like how big are the curds going to be. So I think it's just a safer bet to press it through the sieve. So make sure you get every last bit in there. So again, I like this technique because I think it really maintains that fluffy texture that you want in the ricotta, but also makes it like pretty luxurious and smooth. So now I'm going to add my flavorings. For sweetness, I'm adding some confectioner sugar, and this is, I would say, a very lightly sweet filling. It is definitely not cloying in any way. And then a little extra sweetness from honey. So 2 teaspoons vanilla extract, a pinch of kosher salt, just to help bring the flavor out of everything, a ½ teaspoon of freshly grated lemon zest, and then a ½ teaspoon of orange. And then now that I have the lemon zested, I'm gonna cut a wedge because I'm also gonna add a teaspoon of lemon juice. The sheep's milk ricotta that's traditional is like a little bit tangier than the cow milk, so just to give it a little bit of tang. You don't want to stir it excessively because the sugar will start to thin out the consistency of the ricotta. Now I'm just going to switch to the whisk and just give everything a nice kind of thorough but not prolonged like stir. I'm going to go ahead and transfer it to my pastry bag just so it's ready to go for the filling, and then I'll keep it in the fridge while we make the shells. This is not like a precisely piped filling, so you could use a Ziploc bag, and it's not so thick that you're going to have a hard time. So Ziploc bag is like totally fine. Okay, so I'm just going to let everything kind of fall to the bottom of the bag, kind of work it down. I don't need to cut an opening yet, and then I'm just going to twist the end of the bag This can go into the fridge and keep it cold until we're ready to fill. This is kind of the exciting part. We are ready to start forming our cannoli shells. So I have my cannoli molds. These are, I think, like 5.5 or 6 inch long stainless steel, like hollow metal tubes. These are great. This was like an easy online purchase. I have 8 of those. This is a 5.5 inch cutter. This was the largest cutter in the set of round cutters that I have, where it's like all little concentric circles. If you don't have a cutter this large, what you can use is like a deli lid and a wheel cutter and just sort of cut around and like trace the circle basically. So here we go. I'm going to start by just dividing this dough in half. Then I just want to form each half sort of roughly into a sphere. Just roll it between your hands if you want to. And then I'm going to keep one covered on the work surface while I roll out the other. I'm going to use a little bit of flour. A little bit of flour is fine. And I want to roll this out into, it doesn't have to be an exact shape, but kind of a rough round that's 1/8 of an inch thick. You can see that I'm lifting it up frequently and moving it around. And that's just because if the dough wants to spring back, I want it to hold its shape. So let it spring back if it wants to spring back a little bit. The goal here is to roll it out in a size where I can cut about 3 circles. So when I'm punching these out, I want to press straight down with the cutter and then twist. That's going to help to release that circle. I am going to do one more round of cutting with the scraps, so we don't want to waste that. So I have now my 3 circles. I'm going to set these off to the side, keep them covered on the work surface, and I'm going to repeat that same process with the second half of dough. So now I have another ball of scraps, and this one I want to roll out one more time, and I'm going to cut 2 more circles. And because we've already rolled this out, the dough has been worked a little bit. You can just see as I press it that it's going to kind of want to spring back. So you are going to have to use a little bit more pressure. So now I have my 8 circles, and now I want to let these rest for about 10 minutes. I want that gluten to relax. I want the dough to kind of chill out, because I'm going to come back and roll each one individually a second time and then form it around the mold. And this is because I want the dough to be even thinner than it is now. Besides kind of the moisture content of the dough, another key to achieving that like bubbly, blistery texture is that you need the dough to be really, really thin. We're going to go back in with each one, make them thinner, and fold them around our cannoli mold. So just about 10 minutes, we'll come back. So I'm going to take one of the circles, and I'm actually going to take from that first like piece that I rolled out, so it's the most relaxed. Keep the rest covered. Using a little bit of flour again. And I want to lengthen this circle in 2 directions, kind of opposite directions. So I'm going to go top to bottom and then left to right. I want a thickness of about like 1 to 2 millimeters even. You can either move the rolling pin and like roll side to side, or I move the dough. I'm kind of starting from the middle and going up and then back to the middle and then down again. In the recipe, it says rhombus-like shape. I'm not sure that it's really a rhombus, but it's not really a circle anymore. It's something that has sort of like a dimension to it, like sort of some sides. It's, yeah, but it's like so amoeba-like. It's like, it's a little irregular. It's really thin. This looks good. Feels good. I'm just going to pull it off the surface one more time just to make sure it's not sticking. I have the thickness that I want, and I'm going to form it around my cannoli mold. So I'm going to take one of my molds. I'm going to lay it across the longest part of the dough. Then I'm going to take one side and bring it up to the top of the mold, so it's just kind of resting right there. Then with my leftover beaten egg, I'm just going to take the tiniest dab, and I'm just using my finger. I'm going to smear that just across the dough. Then I'm going to take that other side of dough, bring it up and over, and overlap it just on the like egg covered part of the dough and press gently to adhere. And we've now formed it. So this might look a little crazy because I have not wrapped the dough tightly around the mold at all. But that's what you want, because when you go to fry it, it's going to shrink up quite a bit. It's going to kind of like form around the mold. I'm going to kind of set this off to the side. So pick it up by the ends of the mold, lay it down gently. And now I'm going to repeat that process with the remaining circles of dough. And you can just leave the formed pieces around the molds uncovered as you work. These are all set. The next thing I'm gonna do is heat my oil. I didn't heat my oil in advance because actually it's a good thing to let these kind of hang out a little bit at room temp uncovered. By leaving them out at room temp, the outer layer is gonna dehydrate slightly, which is also gonna help us with that bubble formation. Okay, so for frying our cannoli shells, I have a large Dutch oven here. I have a candier or deep fat thermometer clipped to the side. I'm using a neutral oil for frying these. This is peanut. I like using peanut for frying. Traditionally, you'll find that these are fried in lard, but it just feels like a lot of lard for you to get your hands on. But what you could do is actually mix your fats. So if you have some neutral oil for frying, you could also just throw in, like, you have extra lard, you could add that to the pot as well. So whatever you're deep frying at home, it's a good idea not to fill your vessel more than halfway. All right, so I think I'm gonna add all of these. And actually a good tip is hold on to the containers that your oil came in, because once the fry oil is spent and you're ready to get rid of it, you can pour it back into those containers using a funnel. And then you can either like recycle it. Sometimes there'll be like a cooking oil recycling in your area, or sometimes at farmers markets, or you can just toss it in your garbage, but not down the drain. Don't put it down the drain. That's very bad. Bad for your pipes. These have been covered the whole time. These are supposed to be uncovered. Pretend like these have been uncovered. We covered them because we ate lunch. I didn't want them to dry out too much, but if you're just going straight into frying, what you should do, just leave them uncovered. Okay, so I'm gonna start by heating this over medium high. And once it hits about 325, I'm gonna turn it down to medium. You don't really wanna blast the heat because you can very easily kind of surpass the temperature you're going for. And what we want is 350. It is hot enough to initiate that like puffing of the liquid and giving you those blisters, but not so hot that the shells brown before they're cooked all the way through. And then I have here, it's like a good idea whenever you're deep frying to like do your mise en place, get everything ready to go and organized. I have a pair of tongs. And then I have a rimmed baking sheet here with a couple layers of paper towel. And that is for transferring the shells as they finish cooking. Okay, so I'm at 340, so I'm almost there. And keep in mind that whenever you add anything to the oil, especially if it's cold, but even if it's room temp, you are then going to cause the temperature to drop. So keep an eye on your heat and on your temperature. And I'm sort of always moderating the heat a little bit when I'm frying. So you'll have to turn it up and then back down, but just sort of keep an eye. If you're in the 350 range, you're good. Okay, so I'm just about there. This is how I recommend you add your cannoli to the oil. Grasp the molds by the sides, lower it down into the oil, and you're gonna actually hold it here. You're literally gonna just suspend it in the oil. And I'm gonna do this for about 20 seconds until the dough has a chance to puff up and kind of form around that metal tube. So you can see it's bubbling. And then once it starts to really puff up, then I can let it go. Okay, so I'm just gonna repeat that. And you'll have to fry in batches because you probably won't be using a vessel large enough to get all 8 in there. So you'll most likely be frying in batches of 4, 2 batches of 4. And then you're gonna fry these until each one is kind of nice golden brown. And another sign besides color that they're done frying is that you won't have as much bubbling, because basically all of that moisture has evaporated and like cooked off. So I can let that one go. This one has started to slide off the mold. That's normal. That's okay if that happens. Because you're kind of holding it and suspending it in the oil for the first 20 seconds or so of frying, that is a good chance for it to already maintain that kind of hollowed out shape. So it's okay if the mold then slips out. You don't need it. You can just take it out of the oil. If you think that this process looks so fun and you really want to try it, but you don't want to get cannoli molds, that's fine. You know what you can do is you can basically follow the instructions, do everything that I did, but instead of forming them around molds, just cut them into like tortilla chip sized triangles or squares or whatever and fry them. You'll get the same texture of the dough, and you can really just make like a cannoli dip. So put the cream in a bowl, fry them kind of as chips, and serve them that way. It'll be so much fun. Okay, so these are looking so good. And you will have to keep turning them because they puff up so much, they kind of bob out of the oil. So keep them moving just so that they color evenly in the oil. So if any of the tubes fall out, you can go ahead and just take them out and set them off to the side. All right, so this is the very first one. This guy's ready. So I'm gonna take it out and just set it on my paper towel. You can see how blistered that one is. It looks so good. So my oil is, I'm like at 345. It's looking good. I can turn it up a tiny bit, but you just want to sort of hover it in that like 350 range. waiting for the bubbling to really subside is a good indication that you're gonna have a super crisp texture in the shell because all of the water has been cooked off. So that's just really what you're looking for. All right, I'm gonna take this guy out. Looks so many little blisters. It looks so good. One of the things about frying is like because it uses so much oil, I like to reuse the oil as much as I can. If you are gonna reuse your fry oil, let the oil cool completely in the vessel. It's a really bad idea to try to like transfer hot oil to anything. And if you're gonna just get rid of it, then you can just use a funnel to pour it back into the vessels that you saved and then just toss it or recycle it. Recycling it is great. And now I'm gonna add the second batch of 4. Okay, so I'm gonna let these fully cool. They came out of the oil super hot. So we wanna let them cool before we fill them because I don't wanna like loosen up and warm up that filling. But I'm gonna grab my pastry bag from the fridge, snip a little opening, and then we'll fill them. And I'm also gonna grab some fun toppings to put on the ends. So excited. I have all of my toppings, my filling, my shells, and a platter for serving. It has so many little blisters. It's also so incredibly lightweight for its size. So you know it's just so airy. It has like this beautiful, even golden brown color. So I have my mini chocolate chips, kind of a classic topping for cannoli, ditto chopped pistachios, and then I love this stuff. This is like candied orange peel. So also a great topping. So I'm gonna snip about a 1-inch opening. I'm gonna take one of the cannoli shells and I'm gonna kind of fill from the middle out on both sides. You could fry the shells even the day before. Make sure you let them fully cool and store them in an airtight container. It's just that you wanna fill them at the last minute. So now for topping, I just really do like the look of the candy peel, especially with those like citrus flavors in the filling. I love the idea of just like draping a piece on either side. If you're doing chocolate chips, just like that, looks so good. Do some pistachio. I think I'm gonna go with plain, just so I can really taste the filling and kind of experience the texture of the shell. I love that like hint of cinnamon from the filling. It really does kind of give you like delicious cookie kind of texture. I just love that contrast between the like ultra crisp, really like toasty shell and this delicious like creamy citrusy filling. Sometimes I distinguish between recipes that are fun to make and recipes that are fun to eat, and I feel like this is both. The dough is so easy, no food processor, no stand mixer, no need to turn on the oven. So I think it's a really fun recipe for the holidays because it's kind of celebratory and you can kind of customize it, set up a little cannoli bar if you want to. Thank you as always for watching. Try this at home, and you can go get this recipe, everything else we make on the channel, and thousands more recipes at NYT Cooking.